Well, welcome everyone to this week's Menlo Midweek podcast. My name is Mark.
My name is Phil, and if you're watching this, you can tell the vibe's different.
We shook it up.
Yeah, the vibe is different, which I discovered 3 minutes ago when I walked in. Mark had done all of this.
Phil thought he was in the wrong room.
Yeah, like, whoa, this is different. So it's nice, man. I like it.
Cool,
It's good.
thank you.
Chair is definitely more comfortable.
Chair's more comfy.
And it doesn't creak.
Less squeaky.
That's exciting.
More chill. I mean, we wanted to, if people are going to help serve with us with having, being in front of cameras and microphones, we want to make sure that they're having a chill vibe.
That's exactly right. Yep. So thanks for doing all the work.
You're
man.
welcome.
It's
Speaking
fun.
of new things, speaking of stuff that will make this experience better, I got this studio a little gift, Phil.
Oh yes.
I alluded to this a few weeks ago in our startup series because it kind of emulates what we're going. So for those that are listening, I'm handing Phil a bag
Okay, I'm
now.
gonna check this out.
And this bag is going to hold something that feels...
It's lovely gift wrapped. Yep. Mm-hmm. Let's see. Amazing.
Yes.
What?
Can you describe what that is, Phil?
Oh, my goodness. I feel like I just got put into the Smithsonian, dude. I want to know where you got this. So this was like a piece of tech, actually, that I really wanted when it came out.
Oh, yeah. I think everyone did.
So you have the original iPod that, like, if you were alive back then, you know all of this. If you're younger, you're like, what's an iPod? Think of, like, if you had a phone and all it did was play music. That's kind of what an iPod was.
Yeah.
We're like, what's like a normal phone? Well, it's like an iPhone, but you know how you use it to make calls every now and then to your grandmother? That's what it was always for. So the iPod then originally sort of it's like bridge towards a phone, and they made an iPod that was like an iPhone, but without the phone part, and they called it an iPod Touch.
Yep.
So Mark just handed me a still boxed.
It's boxed, dude.
Is this sealed? Like this has never been opened.
It's never been open.
So this is
dead stock, baby.
This is dead stock iPod Touch. Where did you get this?
Missy found it in her closet.
What?
I know. She's like, I'm going to donate this stuff. And I was like, not that. Everything else, sure.
Amazing, dude.
I think it was one of those gifts with purchases from like a computer.
Oh, yeah. I remember when they used to do that.
And
I mean, this is so fun. And actually, I think it was Leo had one of these until just a couple years ago. They don't really like support the software on them anymore. But because we didn't want to like give him a phone or whatever, so we had one of these just hanging around. That is incredible.
Yeah.
Dude. That is amazing.
So that'll live here for our series to emulate our Startup Faith series that we're in. It's so funny because it's so small.
I know.
I remember it being the perfect size, and now that I look at it, I'm like, that thing's tiny.
So tiny. Well, we've all gotten used to just enormous screens.
Yeah.
So if you look at that, you're like, what is happening? But
yeah,
I mean, it was so fun. And then eventually you could like put apps on it. You could do videos. You could surf the web. I mean, everything that an iPhone could do, but without having an iPhone.
Do you remember the Apple launch of the first iPhone?
Oh, yeah.
I watch that probably once a year.
Yeah.
Where they have that launch where they're like, it's a way to access the internet and make calls and this at the same time. And as they're saying this, people are putting together that it's not three separate devices, but it's one thing. Ooh, chills.
Well, and Apple, I mean, they've always been really good at taking something, which like, I mean, we can have a Vision Pro conversation. If you don't care about this, just skip the playhead ahead to the sermon. But I borrowed someone's Vision Pro this weekend while Alyssa was out of town to try it. So that one, I think they've really missed the mark on it. But they have historically done a really good job. Like they're not the first to market.
Yeah.
But when they do hit the market, they've like learned the lessons that everybody else has been paying the stupid tax to learn. And whatever they release is just unreal.
Yeah.
And so, I actually sold phones when I was in high school for Sprint corporately, my senior year in high school. Worked at Radio Shack, and then I was like a top wireless cell phone salesperson. Then I got recruited to go sell to companies when I was a senior. And I had a smartphone. I sold smartphones as a senior in high school. This was 2001, 2002. Sure. And so this is this is 6 years before the iPhone. But what Apple did was they made all of that stuff that had been like nerdy and complicated, they made it cool and work well. And so then you look at like what VR is doing right now, and Apple was like, what if we made a headset that was too heavy, way too expensive,
Needed a cord,
a really limited feature set that developers are not making things for. Like, well, that's the Vision Pro. I mean, that's not exactly their pitch, but that's what it is.
Sounds like you're a worse salesman now than you were.
Yeah. Well, for products I don't believe in, it's pretty hard for me to sell them.
Yeah,
I think that's true for most of us.
Absolutely. Speaking of products you believe in, we're trying to sell Jesus as the original startup faith founder guy, kind of.
That's exactly right.
So we are in week 3 of our Startup Faith series, Phil. Let's go ahead and dive in. Let's catch people up for those that might have missed it.
Yeah, for sure. So we have been trying to follow the pattern of dream, design, and then this week we talked about develop.
Yep.
And, those all are terms that sort of point to these phases or points of process in just any startup in Silicon Valley. They are also things that we see at different points in the early church in the book of Acts. So we tried to do this thing where you're trying to highlight, here's what maybe you know of in Silicon Valley through some common language or shared history. And then actually, that's not the first time that's happened. Let me show you how that has looked in the New Testament. And I think especially for people who are not normally church people to go, no, this is actually, it's describing historic events.
Yep.
This isn't just maybe some Bible passages that you've dismissed in the past. These are real historical events that are actually verifiable. And then from there saying, if you're a person of faith, you're a follower of Jesus, and you're trying to figure this year out, what are the practices that might be helpful for you in sort of kind of firing up whatever you feel like God's calling you to do this year? And then if you're somebody that's trying to discover faith for the first time, what are sort of some baby steps or some first steps you could do just like you would maybe start up that company to start up or restart your own faith?
Yeah. And I love how the practicality of this series specifically. I feel like it's very geared towards those that are either trying to incorporate new rhythms or reset the rhythms that they have, or try something on for the first time, which I feel like is kind of all of us in a way. And so we talked a lot about resistance in this message. And there are some points where I'm like, I don't know if I agree with you on until you kind of got into it. And then I was like, all right, I think he won me over.
Yeah. Well, hey, it's not really me. It's the Holy Spirit.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are conditioned. There's a book called The Coddling of the American Mind. My buddy's doing a series called The Coddling of the American Church that's pretty... Yeah, I was like, oh, that's a good concept. And I think one of the things that book highlights that I think is a helpful concept, I'm not co-signing on the entire book or anything,
Right.
but I do think we have become, without realizing it, a pretty fragile place and a pretty fragile people. And so we want to create environments that sort of never press in, that we never face resistance. And I think the faith aspect of that can sometimes be, well, I face resistance or I hit an obstacle or, there's some question I can't find the answer to. And rather than refine my faith, rather than sort of reinvent something, I just retreat. I just run. But the premise of the coddling of the American mind is that we're not fragile. It's actually better than that. We're actually anti-fragile. That you actually need resistance in order to grow. And the clearest example of this is like a tree, right? When they design experiments, you probably know more about this than I do. When they design experiments where they have a tree grow in an environment that's controlled without wind, that tree actually can't withstand any elements because the roots have not grown in a way that resists or are ready to take a hit. Whereas when trees are environments where they have to endure that, the root systems grow so wide and so deep that something that looks unthinkable can happen to that tree and it can still survive. And I think God's built us to work the same way. And so understanding even in our own faith, what does the pivot need to look like? Where am I changing or learning or growing? Not until I hit resistance, but actually as I hit it and on the other side of it. And so hopefully we gave people some ways, I always think that like the history of Silicon Valley is so interesting. And so hopefully we gave people some things that at the time, if you were around, it like made sense to go, well, I could see why at the time Blockbuster didn't buy Netflix. They felt like they were in similar spaces and all that stuff. And like, in that situation, Blockbuster was the monster and Netflix was this young upstart. And now Blockbuster is a punchline and Netflix is the big monster. And you're like, that's because Blockbuster didn't pivot, right? Or we talked about Kodak, and I spent about 8 years growing up in upstate New York, and Kodak's pretty big up there. And, like they literally invent the digital camera that is going to disrupt the entire market. And rather than pivoting, they perceived the threat as an opportunity to run from the new thing. And now you see companies that digital camera and digital photography is everywhere, and Kodak declares bankruptcy. And so I think God often refines or redirects that. And so then we looked obviously in the early church, and it's just this like incredible move of God that, we can talk about the Saul part of it, but even if you remove the crazy like Saul part of the story, you just go, there's a group of people, and this was very normal at the time. There's this group of people that are trying to make a new movement for a Messiah work, and they're in a comfortable place where they know they have friends, they have resources, they probably have a place to stay, they have gotten a hearing, right? And they were probably not going to move for a while. And God brought resistance so that they had to move.
Right.
And I think oftentimes God does that in our lives too. When we're not moving, He insists. And sometimes resistance, pressure, and challenge are the way He does it.
Yeah, I want to try to unpack that a little bit more, because I feel like I think you used the word walls, and many times when I hit a wall, it's hard for me to discern why that wall is there. Is that wall for me to try to push through and change something about how I'm doing something, or incorporate a practice into my life that's the pause? Is that wall there for me to hit and bounce off because I'm headed in the wrong direction entirely? How can we figure out, when we have walls in our lives, what those walls can signify?
Yeah, I think, I tried to prompt those types of questions. I used that Chinese proverb quote it's an anonymous Chinese proverb quote, but when you hit a wall, it's not the wall's fault. Which
I was like, whatever, Phil.
I hate that quote, because you're like, oh, I hate that stupid wall, But being able to go, hey, what is the wall? And I think some of that is like, we know the answer.
Right.
The wall is God's way of getting our attention, but it actually, even if you're not a person of faith, you're like, hey, you know what? Here's the wall I normally hit. I normally hit a wall of exhaustion. That's the wall for me, where it's like, I'm running too hard. I'm putting too many hours in. I don't have enough margin, and I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
And pushing through that wall is a terrible idea.
Right.
And we've probably talked about this before, but Psalm 23 is the famous psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, and in it, there's kind of this breakdown of this metaphor of God as our shepherd. And there's a book called A Shepherd's Look at the 23rd Psalm. I don't remember the last name, but his name is Philip, which is why I remember it.
Yep.
And in it, he talks about a practice. It's a little controversial, but he talks about a practice of ancient shepherds where if a sheep have we talked about this?
I don't think so.
If a sheep, specifically a lamb, would venture off, like the concern was that this thing would just walk off a cliff, like they're not paying attention, whatever. And so if a sheep would do that, the shepherd would try to keep redirecting the sheep to be back with the group. And eventually, actually, the passage that says, he makes me lie down in green pastures, could have been referring to a practice where a shepherd would literally break one of the legs of the sheep.
Wow.
And then put the sheep over his shoulders while the leg healed, so the sheep would hear the voice of the shepherd, like, you're right here. And then literally for the sheep to like go to the bathroom or eat or whatever, the shepherd would have to pick up the sheep and make the sheep lie down in green pasture, right? And so you like think about that in your own life, and you're like, well, that's wildly uncomfortable, And there's some controversy about it, like I get it, but I do think that, metaphor or not, there are times in my life where I'm like, I'm not going to take a break. I'm not acknowledging my limits. I don't have the margin or boundaries that I should. And God's like, cool, you're going to get sick, buddy. Like, naturally, that's the way I've built the world to work, and it's what you're doing to your body. And I think God is supernaturally at times bringing something into my life to slow me down and cause me to, like, for me. So I think sometimes it's really clear. The wall is just God's way of getting our attention. I think other times it takes like the kind of community around us to say, what was the thing I was running to? You know, like,
Yeah, that's so good.
if I was running to something that's like for my good and the good of other people and it's healthy and all that stuff. And there are people in my life going, man, what you're doing really matters. Like this is a smart thing for you. You're built to do this. We talked about, I think on the last podcast, kind of identifying what's your shape, how's God made you.
Yes.
And you're like, I feel like the direction I'm running in is how God made me, and it's the passion that He's given me and skills, and let's go. And I'm facing obstacles, but I still feel that call from God, and I'm doing it in the right way. I hope that you have people in your life group, family, close friends that are going, this is helpful. Let us hold you up as you go in this. But I think if what you're running after, if the thing you're running after isn't good for you, then actually I think sometimes the wall is a blessing to keep you from, there's a passage in the Hebrew Scriptures in Genesis 18 or 20. I always think about this. It's Abraham is traveling, and Sarah, his wife, is with him, and she is so beautiful that Nebuchadnezzar, he's worried that Nebuchadnezzar is going to kill him to take Sarah as his wife, or to add her to his harem. And so not the first time, not the last time, and it's a pattern that his son repeats, he lies. It's kind of actually a little bit true, but he says, Sarah is my sister, which weirdly, she was his half-sister. But like not the piece of it, they're saying, is this your wife? And he's like, oh, she's my sister, And so then there's this prayer moment where basically there's like sexual dysfunction that God brings to the entire kingdom. And God comes to, I think I'm remembering this correctly, to the king, and the king says, hey, how could you hold me accountable for doing anything? I haven't done anything wrong. I haven't even slept with her. And God says, yeah, of course you didn't sleep with her. I didn't let you. And I just wonder, like, how many times in my life was I running for dysfunction? Hopefully not that like overt awful sin, but like running towards dysfunction in my life. I've hit a wall, and then I'm mad at God. And it's like, well, He was actually protecting me from myself. Like He was protecting me from an unhealthy pattern, from like outright sin in my life, from something that was going to damage me, other people that I cared about. So I think all that sort of gets wrapped up in there. But conversation with people, like I hope that this series is really helpful in life groups, because that's where these things, I think, really we get wisdom pretty quick, whether we want it or not, right? Like, hey, what are the walls that you're facing in your life right now? What are the ones that you should push through? What are the ones that are there to stop you down, slow you down, or stop you on purpose? And then, that question of what are the areas of your life right now where you're like constant, I think about that kind of like blue ocean, red ocean that we talked about. Yeah. Of this strategy. Red ocean is the strategy of in like marketing or sales, where you're going after a limited, it's a fishing metaphor, right? So you're going after a very heavily fished area, and there's not a lot of fish left in it, right? And so those fish have become very choosy. They know what they're doing.
This is literally the Bay Area,
right?
Too,
right.
by the way.
Yeah.
There's a few reservoirs that are around here that have some fish in them. They're
mostly overfished.
They've seen a lot of fishermen.
Right. Yep. And so I think sometimes we go, well, I've got 60 minutes to give God on a Sunday, right? Or I've got 5 minutes that I'm giving God in the morning on my car ride where I'm praying, or I've got, whatever. Like you have these like really limited things, and we just spin up and spin up and spin up and spin up, and we go, God, how can I find the church that's like perfectly curated to me for those 60 minutes? Yep. How can I find the devotional on YouVersion or whatever that perfectly gives me that 5 minutes so that I have everything I need? And then meanwhile, you literally have a blue ocean of schedule for the rest of your day and the rest of your week that you're feeling overwhelmed and frustrated, maybe anxious, depressed. And God's going, would you let me in there? Right? Like all of a sudden, all that self-critique and all that thought of like, well, I don't know if I can do it, and I'm not sure this is helpful, and that book might have been better, and Phil's not that great a preacher. Like all these things that we can bring when it's red ocean. I hope that the blue ocean of it is maybe you're running up against a wall, but you're in a room that's wide open with your schedule, with your life, with relationships. And I think there's a chance, I hope, in this series for people to go, you know what, I need to I need to expand my horizons. And I think one of those things in the Bay Area, we talked about Menlo Next this weekend, and if you're new and you go like, Menlo's my spot, I want to get connected, Menlo Next is your spot. But I would say, one of the things that I think can be really challenging is that in the Bay Area, I think people's perception of the relationships that they need is much smaller than the actual answer of that question. So they have like, well, I'm, friends with a bunch of people online, or I have work colleagues, or, I have one or two good friends. And that's, you sort of settle for that.
Right.
And I think some of that is a regional bias that exists in the Bay Area. And it's, I think that we probably are built for more relationships, more real relationships than the ones we settle for. We should make space and time for in-person interaction with friends much more than we do. And, I think if you're a follower of Jesus, we should always be open to the Holy Spirit bringing people into our sphere of influence or us into theirs to be in relationship. And so when we set these artificial caps and friends just become another category we're trying to check off the list, and then we go, why am I so tired, sad, depressed, and lonely all the time? It's probably not the full answer, but it's one of them.
And that's something that I hope that one of the immediate takeaways from this series is just the ability for someone to talk about church without talking about church,
Right.
and incorporating practices like, even just using that language would be familiar for someone working in the marketplace,
Right.
and opening up that conversation in a Christian bent. It would be like super interesting. We've had some friends that have come over in the since the holidays, or just kind of like getting back, catching up. Some of our neighbors that don't necessarily come to church, grew up in church, don't come now. But asking them those questions that we talked about, how you doing? How's listening for those 3 no's. I'm not doing okay.
Right. Not in church right now.
Not in
ready
church
for
right
this.
now.
Things are not going well.
Things are not going well. Yep. And being able to kind of just invite them in a way into a conversation that they probably don't have.
Right.
I think that there's even, people might get a little bit nervous or scared to talk about their faith or Christianity or wherever they are. But I think there's a longing for even that style of conversation.
Totally.
And that in itself will show and give a different feel than other conversations that you'll have.
Well, and I think about how easy it is for our relationships and conversations to be transactional. And I think
that's huge.
I think even Christians can do that, right?
Oh, absolutely.
We're trying to seal the deal, whatever. So you're like, hey, so what's going on? Like, I don't know, man. Faith hasn't really, and we're like, oh, I'm ready. And so you can have that conversation, but you can have it in a way I think that is kind, that's hospitable. And I think when you sit down with somebody to say something as simple as, if they say, hey, things are really not going well, whatever, for you to say, man, I'd really love to know more about that. I'm really sorry that you're experiencing that.
Yeah.
I hope that I can just be, I don't hold all the cards or all the solutions. Even for me, like my faith is a big part of how I answer some of the questions that you're having, but I know that's maybe not for you. Yeah. That's totally okay. Yeah. Honestly, if you'd be willing to, I'd be honored if you just share a little bit more with me about what you're going through, about what you're feeling. And then at the end of the conversation, it may be something as simple as, hey, would it be okay if I prayed for you? Even if you're not going to do it right there. I mean, don't say, I'm going to do it and then don't. That's lying. You shouldn't do that. Some people, they may be bold enough to say, can I pray for you? Would it be okay if I did that right now? That's some people can do that. Yep. You may say, though, like, hey, is it okay if as I think about you this week, I'm praying for you? Yeah. And I just check in with you. Like, I think that kind of kindness to say, whether you ever believe like I do or not, we're going to be friends.
Yeah.
Whether we ever agree on this, whether you ever come to church with me, like I just genuinely care about you as a person. I think that is so confounding. I've noticed that in the Bay Area, when I interact with people that are unchurched people, a lot of times, this is probably church people too. My role, the power differential thing is a weird deal, but when I interact with people who don't know who I am and we start talking, I can kind of feel this thing in Silicon Valley where they're trying to figure out what access and networks do I have that they could get. And it's like, hey, what do you do and where do you work and who do you know? And you're like, oh, this is weird, and I don't think anybody necessarily is like trying to be nefarious about it. We're going to do a series after this one, we'll do baptism weekend, and then we're going to do a series called The Formation Machine. And I think we forget, sometimes I think we assume as Christians, I'm either being formed into the likeness of Jesus or I'm staying static. There is no static. So I'm either being formed into the culture around me or I'm being formed into the countercultural vision of Jesus. So we'll talk a little bit about those competing formation machines that we're in every day.
Yep. I think that's so good. That transactional piece is huge too, because I feel like even if you're not a part of a startup, it's still just endemic to the area that we live in.
Totally.
And it's really hard to escape. That transaction and the turnover too.
Yeah.
Two things that are super complex. But for those that are here and rooted and want to make a difference in the communities around them, those are huge opportunities to again be countercultural to what everyone gets at every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and what's interesting to me about the Bay Area and how transient it is that even the people that lived here for a relatively short time, it's like such a unique and special place that when I talk to people that don't live here anymore but have lived here, you see this like kind of sparkle in their eye. Like the Bay Area did something in them while they were here. And I think trying to recognize, I have friends that do ministry in military towns where military families may only be for 2 years.
Yeah.
And so they kind of know, that those pastors can't go, well, if you're in the military and you're only going to be here for a couple of years, don't really do anything. No. They know we got to really get them connected quickly because they need this community.
Yep.
And even if they're leaving in 2 years, we want those 2 years to be good and helpful. And so I think even if the average tenure for somebody that's younger in the Bay Area is 5 years or less, I would say, man, let's let those 5 years be the best, most faith formative years that we can possibly have. Like, let's flip the paradigm because I think they're experiencing a lot of people who are keeping them at arm's length because they don't want to invest. What if, as people of faith, we approach it exactly the opposite? Our time is short, therefore we should connect. Let's make the most of the time we got.
That's great, Phil. As you're prepping for this message, were there any other startup isms that hit the cutting room floor?
Oh, man, that's a good question. This week, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Let me go look at my notes. I think I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to get the like blue ocean, red ocean concept in. But that one made it, which I'm glad for. It was always going to sort of be built around the like pivot element. We've got one or two that may show up in the final.
Also, that pivot word is probably triggering to so many people.
Yeah,
pivot.
Pivot.
And I feel like during COVID, when that first came out and everyone's like, we're going to be back in person in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then you just heard the series of pivots for the next 6 months. We've got to pivot to this.
Yeah.
PTSD from that word.
Yeah. Well, we could have a line that says, we're going to slow the spread. That was the line for a little while too. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah, no doubt.
Thanks, Phil.
But we have a couple more that I think we may use in the final week of the series. I won't give those ones away. But yeah, I mean, it's been fun to sort of unearth those and obviously use them in a different way than maybe you've heard them used before. And one of the things that I hope happens anytime we use an illustration, this is why you use illustrations, is the next time you're in a marketing meeting at LinkedIn and somebody's like, all right, we're talking about blue ocean strategy, that for you, we've created a mnemonic device where the spirit inside of you might remind you, hey, what is the blue ocean strategy that I was trying with my faith? How's that going? Am I still doing that, right? Or, hey, everybody, we need to pivot this strategy to go, hey, I thought maybe God wanted me to do that here in my life. Am I still doing that? So I hope that all these, or somebody goes, oh, what's our MVP? Oh, yeah, what's my faith MVP? I hope all of them sort of create these little internal reminders of the story of the early church and then hopefully the gift that God's given us through that of what we do in our lives.
Yeah, that's great. I'm also pumped that we're doing Rise Against Hunger again. We talked a little bit about that. So that's just a great opportunity for anyone and everyone to come and make an immediate, tangible difference with those that are in need of food.
Totally.
Like, such a great way for us to invite whoever in our lives feels like that would be a good fit for them. Christian, not Christian,
100%.
neighbor.
Yep.
You know this person, you don't know this person.
Yep.
That's just a huge thing. So if you want to learn more about that, menlo.church/connect. We also talked about baptism.
Yep.
So for those that might not be familiar to baptism, or for those that are newer to church, or maybe wanting to coach someone along in their life that are considering it.
Yep.
What is baptism? What does it signify? Who's it for?
So there's two ways that we practice baptism at Menlo. One of those ways is infant baptism or infant dedication. That's not this one. That one normally would be like parents with a child are saying, hey, we want to recognize God's active and proactive work in our child's life and commit to the kind of way we want to raise them, God's involvement in that, et cetera, their participation in the church. So we do those. The baptism that we're talking about right now sometimes gets called believer's baptism. And that baptism is if somebody's never been baptized before and becomes a follower of Jesus, a clear next step that we see repeated in the New Testament over and over again is that they would then get baptized in water as a sign and a connection to the death and resurrection of Jesus. And so the sort of the picture that we have of it, actually, there's some baptism in the Hebrew Scriptures too that the New Testament concept is built off of, but you don't care. The New Testament example of it starts with John the Baptist. His name actually is probably better translated John the Baptizer. And John the Baptist is the one that started doing this even before Jesus was around. He's Jesus' cousin, half cousin, and Mary and Elizabeth, the mom of Jesus and John the Baptist, they knew each other, obviously, and they were in physical proximity to one another while their moms were pregnant.
So crazy.
And then when Jesus shows up in public ministry, it's 30 years later.
Yeah.
And so John the Baptist is baptizing people and basically saying, hey, I'm baptizing you right now. You should repent. The kingdom of God is near. And he's just getting ready. He's fulfilling prophecy. And go underwater. They didn't even have the full picture of what this meant, but God's just bringing a move of the Spirit. People are getting baptized. They're like, I don't know what's next, but I want to be ready for the kingdom of heaven. I repent. I'm turning from my way to whatever this looks like. And then one day Jesus shows up, and John the Baptist goes, I'm not even worthy to untie this guy's sandals. And Jesus, in fulfillment of prophecy, is like, John, I need you to baptize me.
Yeah.
And so then John the Baptist, which, bro, can you imagine? What? I mean, unreal. John the Baptist baptizes his Lord, right? Crazy. If you've never read that passage, it's incredible. And so what Jesus says, there's sort of these greats that we see in the New Testament. The two ones that we build around a lot are the Great Commission and the Great Commandment. The Great Commission is Jesus' final words to his disciples. He says, go therefore and make disciples of all people, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so making disciples is helping people find and follow Jesus. And baptizing is this clear next step where people identify as followers of Jesus. Sometimes we say it's an outward sign of an inward change or an inward decision. So at Menlo, we'll have people that get baptized at every campus on that Sunday. We teach on this concept on that Sunday, and there'll be people that show up ready to get baptized, that have had conversations, etc. There will also be people who have made a decision to follow Jesus, have not been baptized, and didn't walk in planning to get baptized. And part of our routine at Menlo is we want to remove as many barriers as possible. There's a passage we taught on last year where somebody meets Jesus literally on the road, and they look. And this is how interwoven baptism was in the first century and in the early church. They're like, oh, I gotta get baptized now. I know that's a thing. And there's water on the side of the road. What's to stop us from just stopping right now and getting baptized? And so I think that kind of immediate obedience. It doesn't mean that I'm some spiritual giant. It means I've said, Jesus is my Lord. I'm following him with my life. So if that's you and you've never been baptized, I would just invite you to consider it. It's a great testimony to be able to communicate what that means for other people. We try to come up with great ways for people to be able to tell their story as a part of their baptism experience. It's a really, really cool weekend. And the people that make decisions to get baptized, it's really fun to watch how their faith grows and the steps that they take with Jesus in the months that follow.
Yeah. Dude, I'm hyped on that story. Also, if you haven't read that, a few verses later, there's a girl that asks for John the Baptist's head on a platter.
Yep. Yeah,
And
that's a wild story.
If you're like, is this Game of Thrones? No, it's in the Bible.
It's in the Bible.
Crazy.
Crazy, dude.
I'm going to go revisit that. That's fun. Phil, thanks so much.
Of course. Yeah.
If you need any prayer and encouragement this week, you can reach out to our team, 650-600-0402. Have a great week, everybody. We'll see you soon.
See ya.